Good day, everybody, whatever time it is in your time zone. Assalamu alaikum. I wish I could have joined you in Dubai, but His Royal Highness Sheikh Mohammed was unable to send his jet or his yacht to pick me up in New Jersey. So here we are on Zoom. Thank you for the honor of being a speaker at your important conference. First, a disclaimer. I'm not a physician, a gerontologist, or a real expert on aging, except from my own experiences and studies. I will talk a little bit about those experiences. And also a summary of some of the remarkable advances in medical science during my lifetime. I will conclude with some opinions on lifestyle and then the urgent need to try to reverse the recent declines in life expectancy. I hope that my contribution will be of some benefit to this distinguished audience. On the personal side, I am 86 years young. I say young because I don't feel it or maybe even look completely ancient. And I think I still have most of my marbles. My long-term memory still amazes me, remembering events when I was 4 years old. On the other hand, I do tend to forget people's names and something I might have heard 5 minutes ago. My life expectancy is now expected to be about 92, but I'd like to reach at least 95, inshallah. Since my birth, life expectancy has grown by a truly remarkable 25 years. The expected length of my life so far has increased by over 1/3. When I was born, my grandfathers had already died at the ages of 58 and 62 respectively, which was around the average. I, on the other hand, have been blessed with 6 grandchildren who are now grown up, but tragically I did lose my only son when he was just 51. Maybe he inherited my factor V Leiden clotting disorder, we'll never know. Part of my luck is genetic. My father lived to the age of 93 and his mother to 94. His uncle died just short of 105. And was still active when he was over 100. My mother lived only to 80, but her first cousin just died at 103.5. We cannot select our genes yet. Maybe a time will come when at least some of our inherited negative genes can indeed be eliminated. I attribute my current state of health to medical science and the excellent doctors who are prescribing 15 different medications to keep me alive and reasonably well. I'm fortunate to have a local clinic in our village and a first-class hospital 25 minutes drive away. I have regular appointments with a cardiologist, a dentist, dermatologist, gastroenterologist, hematologist, neurologist, nephrologist, ophthalmologist, pulmonology, plus a urologist, and also a family doctor who coordinates all of my medical needs. So I'm fortunate to have all of them handy. I feel so fortunate to have this excellent support. Plus, Medicare in the US pays for it all. I should also mention my wife, who takes wonderful care of me and saved my life. More of that story later. I would also like to mention sleep, as we know how important adequate sleep is for health. Many older people have trouble going to sleep and use sleep aids. The only aid I use is self-hypnosis, which I learned on an ocean liner crossing the Atlantic. I count slowly backwards from 100, and if that doesn't work the first time, it usually does the second time. I also learned to have siestas when I lived in South America. I have the luxury of a 1-hour siesta every morning and a 2-hour one in the afternoon. I usually manage to sleep 6 or 7 hours a night. Now let's talk a bit about advances in medical technologies which are helping to keep me alive. Medical science, how has this incredible increase in life expectancy occurred? It has been a combination of extraordinary discoveries in medical science, improved hygiene, including, of course, hand washing, a safer lifestyle, modern healthcare systems, plus the exponential growth of communications. Possibly the first major modern breakthrough was in 1796. Edward Jenner developed a vaccine for smallpox. In the mid-19th century, Louis Pasteur further developed the principles of vaccination, as well as fermentation and pasteurization, named after him, a process which kills microbes and thus prevents spoilage. Modern medicine, as we know it and take for granted, is little more than 100 years old. An early pioneer at the beginning of the last century was Paul Ehrlich. He was one of the first to take a chemical approach to immunology. He was one of the founders of hematology. His first magic bullet was aimed at syphilis, a major sexually transmitted infection, which can now be cured by the Ehrlich-developed drug Salvarsan. I believe that an uncle of mine contracted syphilis and was saved through Salvarsan. Another dramatic breakthrough was for insulin for diabetes in 1922, and still widely used today. Insulin was discovered by 3 scientists in Toronto. In 1928, as we know, penicillin was accidentally discovered by Sir Alexander Fleming, although it didn't become widely available until the 1940s. When I contracted and was hospitalized with chickenpox in 1942, my parents had to sign a release for me to have administered penicillin. It was not yet approved for use in children. During the war, the first company to mass produce penicillin was Pfizer, a company where I worked for several years. When I was growing up in England, there was a major outbreak of poliomyelitis, which paralyzed large numbers of victims. The common treatment was to help sufferers through an iron lung in a hospital setting. Polio was highly infectious, and only in 1955 did Jonas Salk develop his injectable vaccine to prevent people from contracting it. His discovery was followed by Albert Sabin's oral version. Other geniuses who made major contributions to medical science included James Watson and Francis Crick, who proposed a double helix structure of DNA, which gave rise to modern molecular medicine. Drug and vaccine discovery, as you know, is normally a slow process requiring extensive experimentation and testing, followed by regulatory approval. There has been progress made on drugs to treat severe conditions like various cancers, pulmonary diseases, heart disease, and stroke. Alzheimer's is now an important research target. The recent rapid development of life-saving RNA vaccines has shown that in emergencies like with the COVID virus, the processes can be speeded up. Cancer, long a major scourge of mankind, is no longer a guaranteed life sentence, thanks in part to new cell therapies. Nanotechnologies like gene therapy are now used to deliver drugs to targeted cells. The increasing use of AI and high-speed computer networks will further accelerate drug development and approval. Now let me talk a little bit about some major influences during my professional career in healthcare. One of the most prolific medical researchers was Dr. Paul Janssen, 1926 to 2003. I had the privilege and good fortune to report directly to Dr. Paul when I worked for Johnson & Johnson, which had acquired Janssen Pharmaceutical. Well, only one drug formulation out of 10,000 actually reached the marketplace. Paul's 57th experimental drug became haloperidol, the first breakthrough medication for schizophrenia. In 1959, his laboratory discovered the now infamous fentanyl. It started out as the first anesthetic drug used for operations. Previously, patients being prepped for surgery were given ether. I recall having a minor operation at the age of 12. When the anesthesiologist approached me with a bag of ether to put me out, I was so scared that my immediate reaction was to actually punch him in the nose. Some anesthesiologists and surgeons evidently discovered that they could get high on fentanyl. And that's how addiction began. When fentanyl was put into a patch form to help reduce local pain, it soon became an addictive drug of choice. Dr. Paul would be turning in his grave to know this. Much research lies ahead to replace opioids for the relief of pain. Incidentally, it has been found that virtual reality can help patients reduce their perceptions of pain. Other notable Janssen discoveries were Imodium for diarrhea, Nizoral for fungal diseases. As well as being a remarkable scientist, Paul was an astute businessman. When he sold his company to J&J, he became the second biggest shareholder of that company. He lived life to the full, said he'd never had a sick day in his life, but he died age 77. Maybe it was genetics. Now, a few words about the company which acquired this genius and its history in the field of medical devices. Medical devices of different types have been around for centuries, if not longer, but of course they were primitive by today's standards. The key date for modern medicine was 1867, when Joseph Lister published his antiseptic principles of the practice of surgery, which focused on the role of sepsis. A few years later, during the Boer War in South Africa, it was recognized that soldiers were dying mainly from the infections of their wounds. Johnson & Johnson, which was founded in 1886 as a textile manufacturer of gauze, was the first company to sterilize gauze bandages in response to the war's findings. This was the beginning of J&J's eventual development into the world's largest healthcare company. While I worked at this company, one of my responsibilities was as Vice President International for the recently acquired extracorporeal medical specialties. This subsidiary specialized in hemodialysis machines and blood filters, which kept patients with kidney failure alive. As I saw suffering patients around the world spending hours having their blood filtered, I said to myself that this was something which I would never have done to me. Well, I came close. More of that later. Some 20 years ago, I had a grapefruit-sized adenoma on my kidney, which had to be quickly excised. I lived for about 16 years with one kidney, which gradually had a reduction in capacity, less than 20%. I needed a transplanted second kidney. However, with a waiting list of 3 years and the likelihood of someone of my age to be eligible was most unlikely, I was faced with the dreaded dialysis. Out of the blue, my wife offered me one of her kidneys. While I have a rare blood type, hers is a universal O, so she was able to be my donor. This was 3 years ago. By the way, Medicare and our supplemental insurance covered the full cost of the transplant, which was about $300,000. We didn't even see an invoice. In many countries, drivers who have died in motor accidents, often motorcyclists, are the most frequent donors. In some countries, drivers have to show an opt-out on their driver's license if they do not wish to become donors. But that is not yet the case in the United States. The first successful human heart transplant was by South African Dr. Christian Barnard in 1980. Much progress has been made, but only about 3,500 transplants around the world each year are successful. Recently, the first heart transplant from a pig to a human was achieved. The patient only survived for a few days. Medical science will surely progress so that more and more organ and other xenotransplants will be possible. One extraordinary recent development is new skin for skin grafts, whereby human skin can be grown in laboratories from stem cells. Recently, a human ear was printed from stem cells and was grafted onto a young person's face. Other bionic medical body parts will surely follow. Another interesting development has been that of a biocompatible surgical superglue to seal human skin. Medical devices like pharmaceuticals are also a fairly recent development. we can view ancient drawings of operations which look pretty horrendous. In modern times, the first cardiodefibrillator was demonstrated in 1899. The first hip replacements were implanted in 1962 by Dr. John Charnley in Liverpool. Their successors are helping older people become mobile again. 10% of people over 60 have osteoarthritis and can have their hips, shoulders, and knees replaced. Thanks to developments by military medical research, there are now whole limb bionic prostheses, which have a brain-computer interface, can function almost as well as natural limbs. Medical diagnostics. There have been some tremendous advances in recent years. We now take diagnostic imaging like MRIs, ultrasound, and heart monitors for granted. The field remains dynamic, aided by AI, including new diagnostic tests for viruses, and genetic screening to determine which treatments might be best for a given patient. In the area of ophthalmology, there are now contact lenses which have been developed to detect and monitor blood glucose levels in tears. Recently, there have been articles in the lay press about developments in the analysis of stools and wastewater for disease-causing bacteria. I recently visited my dermatologist for a regular checkup. She was using some new technology. As she scanned my moles with her microscope, her assistant was able to look at these same moles on a computer. They were being automatically measured, and she called out those measurements to the dermatologist. Now let's move on to the dental field and some developments. Some considerable progress has been made in dental care. I was brought up in England, which used to have a reputation for poorly cared teeth. This was partly a dietary issue as well as neglect. My parents, who were very well groomed in other ways, lost most of their teeth. I recall visiting them when they were older and seeing their false teeth sitting in glasses on the bathroom shelf. Not very appetizing. There is more awareness now of dental health. High-impact ceramics developed through the SPACE program can now fill, restore, and strengthen teeth. People are used to visiting a dentist regularly, having their teeth cleaned and maybe whitened. They're also used to regular flossing and brushing their teeth. I'd now like to share a few personal life experiences. The earliest recorded history of neuroscience dates back to the early Egyptians, who would drill a hole in the skull to attempt to treat brain or mental disorders. The ancient Greeks and then the Romans dissected brains to confirm that the brain ruled and was the center of intelligence. In the Middle Ages, Islamic medicine focused on how the brain and the body interacted. In Persia, Ibn Sina, considered by some as the father of modern medicine, wrote a major encyclopedia explaining the phenomena like dementia, epilepsy, stroke, paralysis, mania, and hallucinations. In the Middle Ages, the first anatomy textbooks included descriptions of the brain. Da Vinci made sketches of the human skull. Later, René Descartes studied the physiology of the brain. In the 19th century, the specific functions of the brain were discovered, including the role of electricity in nerves and the connection between the frontal cortex and executive functions. Major advances in brain science and treatment in the 20th century included Dr. Alois Alzheimer, who first discovered the disease named after him in 1906. The electron microscope was invented in 1931, allowing scientists to study the brain in detail. In 1974, the US Congress established the National Institute on Aging, and to this day supports Alzheimer research. As the population ages, the chances of some type of cognitive decline increases. The most serious brain disorders are Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, and amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS. Some 25 years ago, when I was working for Pfizer Pharma, we had the first approved Alzheimer's drug, which seemed to hold promise. I was personally involved in setting up the first Alzheimer's Society in Warsaw, Poland. Unfortunately, the drug never fulfilled its promise. Several more effective drugs are now on the market to slow memory loss and extend longevity, but there is still no cure. Parkinson's was first described in 1817 by James Parkinson. Today, it is the second most common disease of the brain. The causes are considered to be primarily genetic, but there may be some chemical environmental causes as well. There are several drugs for the treatment, including a reduction in hand tremors, but as with Alzheimer's, there's still no means of prevention or cure. Other very serious brain disorders include multiple sclerosis and epilepsy. It is estimated that worldwide, 1 in 6 people suffers from some sort of mental disorder, 1 in 6 people. Sadly, we seem to be some way off from preventative measures and cures, although big pharma and specialist biotech firms are now focusing more and more on solving the challenges of neuroscience. I sometimes have to squeeze myself to ensure that I'm still alive. One reason is because I'm an optimist. Half of my family by nature are pessimists and half are optimists. My trait was inherited from my mother, who, in spite of a great deal of personal suffering, retained her sunny personality. Her favorite songs were Tomorrow from the musical Annie, and a World War II song called You Are My Sunshine, My Only Sunshine. One piece of advice from her, which I still retain, is when you look in the mirror in the morning, smile and say, it will be a good day. Another good piece of advice came from my father, which was try not to retire. Work will help to retard aging. He worked full-time into his 80s and still had an active life into his 90s. I personally was employed until the age of 82. I tell some of my friends who retired in their mid-50s that I would still work if somebody offered me a job. That's one reason why I accepted the invitation to participate in this important meeting. I will certainly also admit to a certain amount of vanity. I believe that a little bit of vanity can keep one's spirits up. I remember my mother having to wear corsets as she aged. They must have been most uncomfortable. Now women prefer to wear age-appropriate clothing. Well, nature has tended to make a lady's rear end expand after a certain age. The opposite often happens to men. They lose their butt fat and they appear bony back there. Some men continue to wear the same trousers they used in middle age, so they sag unattractively. With a bit of pride, they could have them taken in or buy more age-appropriate slacks. I'm amazed and don't quite understand old men who insist on wearing shorts in the winter, displaying their bony legs. In order to try to retain their youthful appearance, some people like to have facelifts and Botox. It can help delay the inevitable, but sometimes one can see disastrous effects on ladies in places like the Upper East Side of Manhattan or the West Side of London. Tattoos are another matter. While they are fashionable among the young, they can sag unattractively with age. With some degree of pain, they can be removed. With aging comes the graying and whitening and the loss of hair. The coloring of hair can certainly be attractive if done age appropriately, but a wrinkled older person can be more appealing without ginger, dark brown, or black hair. The loss of hair can be traumatic for a woman, but a well-fashioned wig can certainly help. For men, it is easier to live without hair, and it can be attractive. I happen to be a little bit vain, so I use a hair restorative to slow down the inevitable. Vanity can be a good thing for older people. It can help their self-esteem. Well-groomed beards can be quite distinguished, but men who can't be bothered to shave and let their beards grow untrammeled can look like tramps or hobos. I recall the famous composer Stephen Sondheim was good-looking in his youth, but was completely disheveled in middle and old age. Of course, one's physical appearance is only superficial. How about the brain? We know that keeping one's mind active also helps the mensus sana in corpore sano. I'm very supportive of the concept of lifelong learning, and I continue to enjoy learning new things. Like a number of my contemporaries, I like to do crosswords, spelling bees, puzzles, plus Scrabble on my iPad. I keep mentally challenged by playing the piano every day, preparing for a weekly Zoom lesson. Reading musical score and transferring that to the fingers is really quite a complex mental exercise. I read the daily paper, but selectively. I do not watch the news on TV or on the internet. As I tell my friends, aging is challenging enough. Why get depressed on top of it? We watch TV in the evenings, usually a nature program or something amusing. We avoid violence, which is all too common. I read 2 weekly magazines and a book every week or two. Recently, I've been going through the writings of Nobel Prize-winning authors. I also like to write, other than emails. In addition to a memoir, I've written a variety of pieces for my grandchildren, and I've also written half of a novel based on the genetics with a working title of 500 Years of a Family. I'm looking for a co-author who can complement my writing. Moving on to the impact of lifestyle on longevity. Diet and exercise. Much is written about the importance of diet and exercise. I will add a little about my own experience. When I was a boy during World War II and post-war Britain, food was rationed in the country. Thanks to the US Lend-Lease program, we had powdered eggs, which could be scrambled with water, or powdered milk, which also came from the US. In the winter, we ate mainly root vegetables and scraps of meat. I remember feeling hungry and walking a mile to the pharmacy to buy licorice pastilles to stave off the hunger. Once a month, my father would bring home a chicken as a treat. He was in textiles and bartered cloth for the chicken, although it was illegal. The food scarcity did not do us any harm. It taught us to appreciate food, but not to overindulge. We did not even know the word obesity. I will add a somewhat yucky subject, if you'll excuse me, constipation. When I was a boy, my parents made sure that I was regular. If they suspected that was not the case, they would give me an enema. I recall being chased around the house, being pinned down by father, having the dreaded tube pushed in by my mother, and feeling the cold water slushing in my tummy. For older people, constipation is not unusual. There are many drugs available today for this condition, but I recommend inserting a simple suppository. I attended a tough prep school in England. Every morning before prayers, breakfast, we were forced to have a cold bath. From May the 1st on, we had to run about 200 meters with just a towel over our shoulders to a swimming pool. We were all required to swim a length. On a couple of occasions, we actually had to break ice, which had layered on top. As far as I recall, no boy ever caught pneumonia. Sports were obligatory, and I enjoyed them all except for boxing. Every term, we had a 5-mile run on the Yorkshire moors. One year, I was lagging in the back, and the teacher accused me of being lazy. In those days, one didn't make a fuss. The British stiff upper lip, you know. If one had a cut or a bruise, we were told to ignore it. However, it was found after my run that I had a cyst behind my leg, which required an operation. Now, as an older person, I do not ignore the many aches and pains. I'm fortunate to have ready access to accessible healthcare, thanks to the wonderful US Medicare program. I enjoyed sports when I was younger, but I had to give up skiing at 81, and recently I stopped playing competitive croquet. 15 years ago, I used to go to a gym, and there I met a great physical trainer. I live far from him now, but we continue our twice-weekly workouts over Zoom. I also have a treadmill in my garage. Walking remains an important activity, but before going on hikes, I try to remember to do some important stretching exercise. I have to climb our stairs several times a day, which is good exercise. However, I tread very carefully. Too many of my older friends have become incapacitated through falling. As for diet, I try to eat modestly and healthily. For breakfast, I have a banana, then a cereal with my own homemade yogurt and berries. Mid-morning, I have a coffee and a cookie or two. Lunch consists of avocado, heart of palm, tzatziki, and a mixed salad with some protein left over from the previous evening's dinner. For dessert, I enjoy a couple of Saharan dates. Mid-afternoon, I usually have some fresh fruit. My next meal is at 7 p.m. My wife cooks a healthy one-course meal 6 evenings a week, and we may or may not have a glass of wine. One evening a week, we go to one of our many local restaurants. I try to avoid salt, but that is impossible when one eats out. And I'd now like to add a few words on life expectancy. Earlier, I marveled at the increase in life expectancy, 25 years on average since my birth. I should add that the fastest growing demographic in advanced economy is the over 100 age group. But sadly, there's been a reversal in the average life expectancy, at least in the US and many other countries. In the US, the current average life expectancy is down to 79 for women and only 73 for men. This has been attributed by some to the lack of universal health care, as well as income and racial inequality. Life expectancy in the UK is down. It's now 80 years. Australia is 84, and in Japan it's 85. Sad to report that in much of Africa and in Afghanistan, the life expectancy is still only just over 50. The coronavirus has been the most commonly cited explanation. But we can blame other more longer-term factors like the opioid crisis, smoking, and alcohol. The major one by far, however, is obesity, which has come with the highest standards of living worldwide. Some 30% of the world's population is now obese, with the most numbers being in the US, followed by China, India, Russia, and Brazil. In percentage terms, 36% of the US population is considered obese. In the UK, it's 28%. Already 50 years ago, half of Americans were overweight. Now it's almost 3/4. This is in inverse relationship to the tremendous advantage in medical science, technologies, and living standards that we've been talking about. It seemed that with prosperity and lifestyle changes, people cannot resist overindulging. A demographic crisis. In the late 18th century, Thomas Malthus projected that the world would soon run out of food, and this would result in a population crisis. This has not happened. In fact, since the Green Revolution, food production continues to increase. If we now accept that overeating is a demographic crisis, it is time for some serious lobbying, like that against tobacco use, which was to an extent effective. Food and beverage companies, as well as fast food retailers, need to be held accountable for encouraging people to overeat and oversnack. Food and beverage advertising should be restricted, like tobacco advertising has been. I know that this is wishful thinking, but maybe the reversal in life expectancy will gradually have an influence. While on the subject of nutrition, we should remember that around the world, there are still millions of people, young and old, who are undernourished with retarded physical and mental growth. The food that is thrown away by our so-called developed world would be enough to feed all of the hungry and less fortunate. I would conclude on a more optimistic note. There is no magic solution for longevity. It is to an extent a matter of genetic luck. Continued development of new drugs, vaccines, and medical devices will certainly help extend life expectancy. People can improve their chances of a long life through self-control. We know that moderation in alcohol consumption can help, but it is a challenge for young people, especially young and college-age ones, not to overindulge. Also, hallucinatory drugs have been a major temptation and scourge. Being overweight is certainly an important factor, but this requires much self-control with all of the temptations out there, including the desire for salt and sugar. It has also become socially unacceptable to be critical of overweight people, but certainly governments and NGOs can do much to try to reverse the trends. Finally, I hope that this conference and others like it can contribute further towards more people achieving healthier, happier, and longer lives. Thank you very much.